Welcome everyone, thank you for joining us today. In this panel discussion, we're going to be unpacking a shift that has the potential to completely change the food and drink industry. This is the GLP-1 effect. Over the past year, usage of GLP-1 medications like Ozempic and Mounjaro have more than doubled, and they're being used for way more than just weight loss. Users of these medications are showing dramatically different eating and buying habits, which has already started to reshape the food industry. And this is just the start. In 2026, key patents are set to expire, paving the way for lower cost options and the potential for daily pill formats. This means far greater accessibility and far greater impact as adoption continues to rise globally. We've already started seeing major shifts in the US markets, and those ripples are now coming over to Europe. So what does this mean for food manufacturers and NPD teams? How can we turn this disruption into opportunity? To help us explore that, I'm joined by three experts today. First of all, we've got Lucy.
Hi everybody, I'm Lucy Wager and I'm a product development consultant working across the food industry with startups, retailers and manufacturers. I have a special interest in health and sustainability, so I'm really excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Lucy. We've also got Mike.
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Hughes and I am Head of Research and Insights at FMCG Gurus. We do consumer research across the food, drink and supplement market and have recently conducted a 20-country survey on usage of GLP-1. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the results here.
Brilliant, thank you, Mike. And we've also got Kate.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate and I'm a product innovation scientist here at Ulrick and Short. My role includes looking at new ingredients and also creating the innovation pipeline. So I'm really excited to be here today to understand more about trends and participate in a really interesting discussion about GLP-1.
Thank you, Kate. And finally, I'm Martha. I'm the marketing lead at Ulrick and Short, and I'm going to be the host throughout today's panel. So GLP-1 has the potential to be one of the biggest consumer health shifts that we will have seen in years. So Mike, let's start with you. From your data, what's actually happening in the market right now?
Well, first of all, we can say usage is higher than official figures show. Our research shows that 17% of people across the globe are using this medication in some capacity. The majority of people are purchasing it privately as opposed to obtaining it from healthcare professionals. Now, that data is skewed towards North America, but nevertheless, we are seeing it being used in Europe and Asia Pacific. We're also seeing it's more noticeably skewed towards the younger demographic. Around 1 in 5 consumers aged 18 to 24 are using it compared to 1 in 10 aged 55 plus. So we know that it is being used. The vast majority of people have been on it for no longer than 12 months, which highlights the infancy of the market, which is why some of the longer term outcomes that we don't know yet. But nevertheless, we're seeing some really interesting findings. The way that we're looking at it is there's 3 types of consumer at the moment. There is the committed consumer, the person who sought out the medication from healthcare professionals who are using it properly as part of a diet's routine. There's the short-term user who is using it for a specific issue, perhaps before they go on holiday or for a wedding or something like that, where the usage is very short-term. And then we kind of got the casual user, whereby they're using the medication but not necessarily making fundamental changes to their diets and lifestyles to capitalize on this medication. And as a result of that, some of the research that we've seen is that there's a bit of a polarization in how effective this medication is deemed. Just as many are deeming it as effective as they are ineffective. So it kind of shows it's being used in different ways, but nevertheless, it's something that is established, it's growing, and it is something that's having an influence on food and drink consumption habits.
Yeah. And what does this actually mean in terms of consumer buying behaviours? You've mentioned about the 3 kind of user types and how they're all using it in different ways. So how is that impacting what they're buying, what they're eating?
One thing that's always important to highlight is what consumers say and intend to do isn't always reflected in what they actually do. And, there's been plenty of presentations that we've given recently around, healthy eating and weight management strategies. And we will say that consumers are cutting down on products A, B, and C. And you'll immediately see a show of hands that say the market data suggests something different. So at the moment, I would say I don't think there's any market where sales will collapse as a result of GLP-1 usage. There may be some product categories that are indulgent orientated that are going to see a shift in consumer behaviour. There's also some product categories that are ingredients that are seeing a boost in sales that they attribute to GLP-1. But the reality, what I think will happen is, consumers will be changing their dietary plans. The impact of this is that it reduces appetite. So, obviously dietary habits have to change. But what we're seeing is that consumers are not necessarily fundamentally changing their diets to something healthier. So they may still be turning to the indulgence treats and saying, well, that's my calorie intake for the day. So what I would say is we're going to see moderated consumption. Absolutely. We're going to see a focus on better for you. And we're going to see people trying to turn to more nutrient-dense products for issues such as either healthcare recommendations to manage the risk of side effects, etc. But it's certainly going to have an impact on the markets in terms of new product development, how consumers eat and drink. But at the moment, and obviously we're saying this from a consumer perspective, I would say it's too early to attribute any growth or decline in market performance purely down to GLP-1 usage.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So I think from that, Lucy, Mike has just mentioned that it is probably going to impact what consumers are choosing, whether it's smaller portion sizes or more nutrient dense. So what is that shift looking like for NPD teams at the minute?
So I think in terms of what we're seeing, there's lots of noise in the industry about GLP-1, what the impact's going to be. I think it's quite category specific at the moment in terms of what we're actually seeing in terms of are we seeing briefs which are specific for a GLP-1 user. I think categories like ready meals are probably noticing the shift a little bit more because it's that category where we can look at portion sizes. What's it going to mean for consumers if they're GLP-1 users? Nutrient density is really important. And I think as an industry, we've probably got a job of educating a little bit around how you should be eating and signposting maybe. I think a lot of it is things that we've already been talking about and now it's actually linked to this is going to be good for GLP-1. Mm-hmm. So I think the answer is development teams are very aware of this. It's one of many things that are impacting us in development at the moment. And I think it's definitely one to watch. And depending on where you are operating, you need to react to it in slightly different ways.
Yeah, definitely. So Kate, on kind of the ingredients side, what type of ingredients would you say would support these product development kind of priorities or shifts?
Yeah, really good question. And I think Lucy's already started to touch upon this, that these are not necessarily new challenges for development teams. We've been aware and talking about nutrition and boosting foods with, key kind of product nutrients like fibers and proteins. There's already quite a lot of interest in terms of what consumers are seeking in their products already. Protein packed foods have been around for a while. In the past, maybe that was seen as more of a kind of specialist product category, and protein was only going into kind of certain more performance style nutrition based products. Now we've seen that overlap and that growth in the kind of more mainstream market, where we see lots and lots of different types of categories, including protein, and also making claims in terms of the amount of protein, but also how protein can then have an impact on metabolic health. So, for example, kind of boosting muscle growth and supporting muscle growth. On the other side as well, fibers, which is something that we've seen a bit of growth in as well, and kind of how fibers can help to, again, boost gut health and improve kind of overall nutrition, as well as satiety benefits. So I think these are kind of really key these are really key ingredients that we've seen kind of emerging in the market for quite a while. And now it's just a case of really growing that, because that consumer interest is growing, and potentially, particularly for GLP-1 users, might be a lot more interested in what kind of nutrients are going into their food. I think that kind of we'll see a growth in kind of consumers selecting that, which is in some ways really great news for the food industry. I mean, at Ulrick and Short, for a long time, we've been helping customers to reduce fat and to reduce sugar in their products. And now the kind of target market is increasing because people are more interested in looking at what goes into their food and kind of scrutinising product labels a little bit more. So
yeah, definitely. Mike, what do you think the impact on food service could be?
It's an interesting one, because when we look at food service and consumption habits, consumers will admit that they're more driven by indulgence. We've asked consumers before about, their interest in micronutrient content on menus, and beyond calorie counting, consumers haven't specifically shown an interest. They're not really interested in things like protein content, fiber content, beyond calories, even sugar, they're not overly attentive to, and they treat it very much as a sense of occasion. I think one of the things that we need to look at now with food services, it's something that consumers use every day. There's so many need states, there's so many occasions, that the occasions where it'll be health orientated, there will be demand for better for you options positioned around, high protein, low sugar, but those products existed already. For those ones purely by indulgence, I think consumers will continue to adopt a debit and credit approach, and they would probably rather just not go out than take that occasion that they enjoy with the enjoyment element of eating and drinking and compromise on that. So I think it ties in with the message for retail as well, that these markets are going to emerge. There's going to be occasions and need states where there's these demand for better for you options. They're not necessarily new. They're not necessarily restricted to people on a GLP-1 diet. But, it's not going to fundamentally change the food and drink market where, there's products associated with indulgence, decadent occasion, a genuine treat. Consumers with those, even if they're under medication, would adopt a debit and credit approach and say, either I'm not going to go, or I'm going to enjoy the meal. I'm not going to, or the drink, I'm not going to seek out something halfway. So I think, the message is, particularly with the food service industry, when it's already struggling in a lot of places, is not to fundamentally change menus for this one occasion or this one demographic.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I listened to an American podcast about GLP-1s and the impact on consumer behaviour, and how I think this is much more relatable to the US market, but a lot of US consumers see fast food outlets as a snack, but it's a very big carb and calorie loaded snack. So I think for me, like as you were talking, I was thinking about from a product development perspective, that is re-looking at menus and actually creating more still nutrient dense, but probably protein rich rather than carb rich options, so that, as you say, Mike, people can still make those choices, go to the places they want to go to, but have something which still fits within their capacity of what they are able to eat. Because I think it is about that. Consumers' behaviour will only change a certain amount. It's going to move the dial slightly, but it's not going to completely reinvent how they eat.
And revolutionise it, yeah. And I think that's really interesting, because you're suggesting there are opportunities to kind of move into new categories and
do things differently. So, by acknowledging that there is a shift with the consumer's behaviour, but how do we still please that customer in a way that is going to meet the needs of their changing diet?
Yeah, and that is actually something that I wanted to touch on. That early research of GLP-1 suggests that it really alters kind of our brain's sense of pleasure, reward, enjoyment. Yeah. So for people that are taking this drug, how can the food industry still provide that in their product?
Yeah, so I think there's been, over the last few years, there's been quite a lot of talk about sort of multisensory and different types of engagement with food. And I think this really plays into that, because I think because people's appetites are changing, but also the way that they experience food and even their taste. You know, as I've looked more into this, actually, I've been really surprised at actually how it changes not only your desire to eat, but then when you eat, you're getting less pleasure out of it. So I think there's really something in a multi-sensory. So there's a sweets company in the US called Peelers, and you peel the outer part of the sweet and then you eat it. And I just thought that's perfect for this, because there's that interaction. It's like a playfulness to it. So you're getting something else out of it rather than just the taste and the texture, which from a product development perspective is pretty mind-blowing, because it's something that we haven't really had to think about. And obviously in confectionery, which is it's an indulgent category and it's a treats area, you know, when you're a child and you're buying sweets, there's that fun element. But actually, I think as we get older now, we're going to be seeking those interactions in a different way with food. And then it's looking at how can that play into different categories where you wouldn't necessarily initially think about that. But I definitely think there is that multi-sensory playfulness that will be coming into food more and more.
And there is also that big trend all about nostalgia that's going on at the minute, retro, going back to kind of your childhood. So it would definitely play into that as well. So I think, Kate, from your perspective on kind of ingredient innovation, what kind of ingredients are coming out into the market or kind of formulations that can help tackle that kind of sensory and emotional challenges that we're potentially seeing?
Yeah, good question. I think obviously we've talked a lot about kind of nutrient dense foods and including really key ingredients in foods that are really important to metabolic health and diet. But as Lucy's touching upon, I think it's really important that people don't lose sight of that kind of fun and playfulness that can come with food. An eating experience should be a pleasurable experience, and that's something that's potentially quite scary for GLP-1 users, to lose that kind of happy event that can happen when you snack or when you eat. That enjoyment, sharing that with family, with other people, sitting down and spending time over food, and that's something that I can imagine people are quite worried about losing by reducing that appetite and almost like medicalizing the food or the meal event. So I think it's really important that in product development we're still obviously producing very healthy but also very enjoyable food that can really give consumers pleasure when they make those choices.
Can you give any specific examples of ingredients or kind of ingredient technology that can help with that kind of pleasure, that indulgence, any kind of like texturizing systems and formulations?
Yeah, I think certainly texture is a huge part of an eating experience. And I think in the past, maybe we've always considered, as an ingredient company, we've quite often prioritized texture, but also functionality of the ingredients when we speak about kind of how we can match something or match an experience. For example, when we take fat out of a product, how can we match the mouthfeel? How can we kind of deliver that satiety and that feeling of fullness? And now, obviously, there's more of a light on nutrition. So what are we, if we're taking out fat, if we're, for example, also removing eggs and catering for a particular dietary group, are we actually still putting the right nutritional value back into that product? So one example I can think of is we launched a product last year that was based on a linseed flour, or quite commonly known as flaxseed as well. And flaxseed has a lot of really healthy fats in it, as well as a really good kind of fiber profile and protein profile. So that's kind of really interesting from a food scientist point of view, because there's a lot of functionality in that ingredient in terms of water binding and oil binding. But it's also delivering on the nutritional functionality as well. So I think, more and more we're starting to look at these ingredients that deliver that kind of dual functionality.
Yeah, no, amazing. Yeah, I think it's clear that we're very much at the start of this, but that GLP-1 is really starting to shake up the food industry and shake up category dynamics as well. So Mike, in your opinion and from your data, how significant do you think this is for the food industry? Do you think it is a really big threat? Do you think it's an opportunity?
Well, I think it's both. Look, we said we've got 17% of people saying that they use it in some capacity. To add some context with the research, about a further, I think it was around 25%, strongly indicated that they would use it. So I think unless there's some significant change in distribution and legislation around the drug and ease of access, more people will be on it in the next 12 months. I think that's something you can say relatively confidently. And new markets are emerging from this. The thing that we've just discussed, reduced appetites, is going to drive demand for nutrient-dense products with fewer calories. It's worth noting that those products will also appeal to additional demographics, which will bring benefits. You can think about older consumers, those who have less hunger in general, single households where convenience is more of a driver and they have a more fragmented mealtime process. So, there's certainly going to be a demand for these nutrient-dense products. There's going to be demand for products that manage side effects, and that's both people using the medication and coming off of it. Our research showed that around 2/3 of consumers who used the medication said that they had a variety of side effects, and around 4 in 10 of those said that the side effects were that severe they considered coming off the medication. So we're not talking about perhaps feeling faint or irregular bowel movement if you use something excessively. We're talking about nausea, hydration, crippling stomach pains, muscle erosion. So there's going to be products that look to manage that. If people are dehydrated, if they're suffering from muscle loss, there's going to be a market there to target products, to target the consumer. There's going to be those consumers who have come off the medication. Most of the people that we spoke to using it said that they're using it for a fixed time rather than ongoing. They're worried about weight gain once they come off it. And again, those people report a variety of symptoms, fatigue and a loss of energy, nausea, muscle erosion. So again, there's going to be products that need to help facilitate that to aid the recovery. And then finally, consumers are learning more and more about GLP-1. It's constantly in the news, and there's a whole plethora of stories of, like positive, negative, unsure. I think, many people probably will still associate GLP-1 as the name of the medication rather than the hormone. But what our research showed is when we talked about the medication, consumers had a relatively polarized view towards it, positives and negatives. They had far more favorable perceptions of food and drink that was seen to stimulate GLP-1 hormones in a more natural way when given a definition. They accepted that this food and drink may not have the immediate benefits of the medication, but it was safer, natural. There was more transparency of what they were putting in their body. So look, there's going to be a whole host of categories that emerge, markets that emerge, and within them there'll be specific categories. I know we mentioned ready meals, but I think, beverages, snacks as well will also be significantly impacted by this. So the opportunity is there. I think one of the biggest challenges is that the industry needs to target this in a responsible way. This is a medical nutrition product. We've talked about the severity of the side effects. We mentioned that, there's a variety of different consumers using these, some for long-term, some short-term. And one of the things we've always said about this market is it's not necessarily the people who need it that are the problem. It's the people who use it irresponsibly. And one negative story will always resonate more than 100 positive stories. And what I would say for the industry is it needs to be seen to be taking a reactive approach where it's saying, hey, we recognize that people are taking this medication. We recognize that there's need states that are evolving as a result of that. And we're here to provide you with these products to be used responsibly, but in response to these situations that occur, and not be seen to be positioning GLP-1 as this magic bullet health solution that encourages everybody to get on it, where that could be potentially catastrophic, potentially if it was using it whilst not needing it and saying, hey, you know, go and use these products, you can buy these. Instead, it's, well, we have to accept this market's happening. It's going to grow. We don't know how it's going to evolve with restriction around legislation potentially and distribution, but it's about saying, look, these markets exist, we're going to target responsibly. And yeah, with that, there'll be plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, so Lucy, in response to that, we have already seen kind of like GLP-1 friendly products coming out in the US. How would you advise NPD teams kind of in the UK and in Europe around creating these products responsibly, as Mike's just mentioned there?
So I think it's really interesting because I think it's a big opportunity for the industry to actually tap into stuff that we've been talking about for years. It's the products that we're talking about, the ingredients we're talking about that stimulate GLP-1 naturally are, you know, things that are high in protein, nuts, beans, all the things that we know we should be eating, that we've all been talking about for a long time. I think this conversation and these conversations around GLP-1 gives us the opportunity as product developers to actually look at premiumization. And this is about, you know, bang for your bite, basically. It's about how much can I get in a few mouthfuls, rather than actually where we'd got to was just sheer indulgence and, you know, regardless of the nutrient quantity. So I sort of really see this, the more I've looked at it, I see this as a real opportunity for us as an industry to almost sort of reset where we are. I think this is one of many challenges that we're facing in the food industry and that development teams are facing. But I think this is quite an exciting one in the sense that we can start to do things that bring real value back into food products. Now, obviously, that does come at a price. But I think we need to accept that these consumers are buying less. They are buying less products. And I think from a personal experience of people I know that have done it, initially when they start the drug, they continue to buy as they normally do, create a lot of waste because they forget to eat, or, you know, and it's a really interesting sort of look at consumer behaviour. And I think, just going back to what you were saying, Mike, there are these sort of unknowns that actually then appear. So the hydration is a really interesting one, and one that I don't think, you know, it was a bit of a surprise that there would be a hydration issue for some people. And where's the opportunity there? And I think when we look at the US market, they've had quite a lot of hydration products, more so than we have. And I wonder whether that will start coming through. And I think you're right, there will be a lot of innovation in the beverage market. So yes, I think there's real opportunity to premiumize and bring some real, and, you know, I think there's an opportunity for us to signpost to consumers nutrient density in a more consumer-friendly way, but actually it's things we've been talking about for years.
Yeah. And so, Kate, to support these kind of products, what kind of ingredients should be prioritized in these formulations?
Yeah, good question. I think as we've sort of been mentioning, anything that brings sort of giving more bang for your buck, anything that's nutrient dense, anything that can support muscle growth, anything that can support gut health, diet, that can help you, like Lucy's saying, sort of things that we've known for a long time have helped you to feel good when you consume them, kind of whole foods, lentils, nuts, plant-based foods, and I think we've sort of seen over the years these things like trickling into the food industry through different forms. One key category that kind of sticks out to me is the plant-based meat market, where, you know, people might choose to follow a plant-based diet for a variety of reasons. But this was a market that kind of emerged, and it was really almost more of a scientific challenge to replicate the texture and the eating experience of meat. And now consumers are asking for products that are actually of more nutritional value. And people might worry about moving or shifting to a plant-based diet because they lose some of the nutrients that they would have in a diet based on animal products. So I think that's really interesting to kind of unpick and understand. But yeah, it's things that we've known about for years: protein, fibres. And I think also, just while Lucy was speaking, I was thinking about the fact that we've been very lucky to grow up in a world where there really is an abundance of food available, and actually potentially what this peptide is giving people is an opportunity to kind of not think of food as something that they must consume in a really a big way. They have to think a bit more about what kind of things they are putting in their body, because they can only stomach or have the capacity to kind of have less. So yeah, suddenly things like protein and fibres become a lot more interesting, and sound a lot more appealing than they might have done in the past. And particularly for us, kind of being a company that's based on clean label ingredients, it's always been very important for us to consider the source of the crop, and also the origin, but then also how it's been processed. And when we actually have the final ingredient, the powder, what's the history of that? What's it actually been through to get to that point? And how can we kind of ensure that through processing we're not losing any of that nutrition, but also creating something that's safe and convenient, and can go into a wide variety of food.
That's so interesting, and I think so important, because I think, there's been so much talk about UPFs, and I think the food industry gets a really bad reputation. And, maybe this is the opportunity that the food industry needs to sort of actually retell some of the stories and the companies that are doing good work. And, I've never met anyone in the food industry that wants to put awful things on, just despite what, some influencers maybe telling everyone. Yeah. And hearing things like that it just gives me such like a warm, glowy feeling, because there's so much good stuff happening. And it also like really ties in with a lot of the work that's being done on sustainability and looking at how crops are grown, regenerative farming. And I know it's a really challenging time at the moment in the food industry, but I feel like a lot of these things sort of play into each other. We've talked about protein and the fact that actually, people have been talking about protein for ages, and it used to be, gym goers and aimed at that, but actually it's everybody now. And we all know that we need more protein. We're starting to talk about more fibre, including more plants in our diets. And I think there's so much that we can start communicating in a more positive way.
Mike, both Kate and Lucy have mentioned about proteins, fibres. What's your thoughts on kind of positioning claims on products? How do consumers view these? Do they want products with, GLP-1 friendly claims written on the front? Are they happy with just kind of protein fibre claims?
I mean, one of the things is consumers are certainly, they have favourable perceptions of protein. They have very aspirational views on it. I think the average consumer doesn't pay attention to the quality, quantity, or source of the protein unless they're following a specific diet. They just like high protein, low sugar products because it's associated with convenient nutrition, guilt alleviation. One of the things that is interesting about the opportunity to reset themselves is we've been talking recently about fibre, and it's something that consumers don't have enough of in their diets. Consumers recognise the importance of it, particularly as they're understanding more and more about gut health and the microbiome. But the thing is, consumers just find fibre a bit dull. And I think the industry is actually partly responsible for that. It's not really done anything to kind of challenge perceptions. And I think whilst it's giving this opportunity now to talk about nutrient density in a different way, we challenge perceptions of digestive health from being something more than just regular bowel movement and avoiding embarrassment, to something that's central to overall health. So we should use that as an opportunity to reposition fibre and just make it more aspirational rather than something that was always seen as bland and boring, and something more that just makes you regular. In terms of products that have GLP-1 claims, I think they will appeal to consumers. I think there's a line where consumers need to understand it. I think what you will see with something like this is brands will look to capitalise it, and some claims will be stronger than others that are more tenuous. So brands can't be seen to be capitalising. A prime example of that is hydration. Is it a genuine hydrating product, or is it something that's just a drink and you've put hydration on it to charge a premium price? So I think if you're making a claim around that, you certainly need to validate it and say how it differentiates. But I think more and more consumers will find this appealing. And I think one of the things is, even if they're not using the medication or potentially pills in the future, they will recognize the underlying trend about what this is, and some of those key things about weight management, satiety enhancing, minimalist consumption, etc. And if they see that product and say, actually, if that can provide some of the benefits, then absolutely, I think that will appeal to them. But the claims have to be credible. And on the reverse of that, you can't have too many claims so that it's seen as medicinal. You know, when we always talk about things like this, you know, the average consumer doesn't spend that much time evaluating a product. We've also got to accept that they're never going to be fully educated on these things. And why would they spend their Friday nights researching about ingredients in products? So they're always driven by the benefits. So I think, you know, obviously at the moment, GLP-1 is a bit of a buzzword where consumers will see it's in the press on a regular basis, and they'll be able to make those links alone. But in the long term, what you need to do is you need to kind of focus more on what the specific benefits of the products are. Because one, the GLP-1 users will be able to recognize those benefits. It also avoids any stigma where people may be using this medication and don't want people to know. So they don't want to go and buy a lot of products that brings attention to them at the point of sale that they are using it. But you've also done what we said about those other audiences. You know, like this idea now that all of a sudden nutrient-dense products are needed is not a new thing. You know, I mean, it's like you may have alluded to, Lisa. You know, we needed these for a long time, and so if you just focus on the benefits and make it mass market, and again, and when doing that, that also allows you to position a product around being beneficial for GLP-1 without necessarily saying to the person, go and take GLP-1, because it said there's those who need it, but there's those who, you know, like I said, one of the biggest concerns amongst healthcare professionals, amongst the consumers in our research, was vulnerable people who don't need this using it irresponsibly. Excessively using it might causing problems, and the industry cannot be seen to be linked with that in any way. You know, I agree with you, Lucy, that I think there's so much wonderful stuff that's gone on in the industry the last 20 years, from when I joined, with kind of products being positioned as magic bullet health solutions, really tenuous claims, particularly around superfoods. That's when I joined in with the industry. To its move forward and really promoted responsible usage. And it can't be seen to undo all that great work by, you know, positioning this wrong. So I would say, absolutely, you know, there will be some claims that appeal. If you do, make sure that it's credible, but actually focus more on the benefits and then appeal to the mass market and say it doesn't have to be revolutionary and you don't have to be using this medication to follow that dietary plan.
We've actually seen some kind of natural GLP-1 booster products coming to the market. And that's kind of come out of, you know, users that stop the medication. We've seen them kind of regaining the weight loss, or like you said, Mike, there's people that actually don't want to take the medication. So, Lucy, what are you seeing in terms of NPD and innovation with kind of natural GLP-1 boosting products in the market?
So I think that ties in with what you were saying, Mike, that actually it's what we've been doing. And it's what we should have been doing. I think the great thing is that this is giving us the opportunity to sort of preach to the converted. So we can do things like provide really nutritious breakfast pots, for example, because I think one of the things that's really critical is making sure that if you're taking GLP-1, or if you have just come off it and you want to continue and not regain weight, you've got to carry on, or you've got to maintain a diet that is going to be beneficial. And so providing breakfast pots that are nutritionally dense and provide nutrition that isn't a huge quantity is where the opportunity is. I think the movement around beans and having more beans in our diets is a massive trend. I don't even want to call it a trend. It's a movement that is really working, and so I think we're already seeing more products being developed that include more whole foods, and retailers talking about the number of plants that are in products.
Yeah.
I think that also then ties into what claims can be made, because it's, you know, the plant point system is, I'm actually a really big fan of it, but it does imply that there's going to be some health benefit to this. And I think that's where it can get really complicated. And so I think you're right that any claims that are being made need to be backed up. But I don't think that should scare us off these products and producing products that are nutritionally dense, higher in protein, higher in fibre, and finding ways of communicating and making fibre a bit sexier because it's needed.
So, Kate, from your perspective, in terms of these natural kind of GLP-1 boosting products that we're seeing come to the market, what types of ingredients should be prioritised?
I think, as we've just been discussing, it's not a case of reinventing the wheel. You know, we don't need to come up with some brand new superfood solves everything kind of formulation. I think it's stuff that has been done within the food industry for years, and now it's just potentially that there's more consumers that might be interested in purchasing those kind of products. So as Lucy said, you know, nuts, fruits, vegetables, and just having an awareness of what you're actually consuming throughout the day. And, you know, for people that are using the drug to lose weight, you are just going to have more of an awareness of how much you're eating, and you are going to be more aware of when you're full, and you know how your kind of body is interacting with different foods and processing things. So on one hand, it's a really good opportunity to reintroduce maybe previously kind of ingredients or whole foods that have not been so appealing. You wouldn't have been reaching for those in the supermarket. Now, you know, things like beans, things like pulses that haven't really been marketed in this way before, and have kind of been seen as kind of quite boring, or you know, things that you wouldn't necessarily indulge in, or even, you know, get your children eating either. I think that's something that this kind of resurgence of a focus on these kind of products is really interesting, and just touching on that, you know, for families that have kind of maybe seen nutrition as a kind of maybe a bit more of a luxury, you know, these products are nutrient dense as something that they can't afford or can't choose for their children because of the cost. I think perhaps reducing portion size, and we've already touched a little bit on the cost that might be implicated in kind of producing those foods, but there's actually a lot of great products that exist out there that are affordable, you know, based on pulses, like we've said. And I think kind of, encouraging those lifestyle habits and those diets early on in people is going to be a really important factor. Perhaps GLP-1 is one kind of arm of lifestyle change that could be adopted for some people and could be the right choice for some people to then facilitate them kind of making those healthier choices for themselves and their children.
So just before we finish then, I just want to get kind of some final thoughts from you all on what's coming next. So Mike, coming to you first, how transformative do you think GLP-1 could be for the food industry?
I think it's going to have some influence. I think it's really important not to overestimate it. Within this industry, if you followed everything, everybody would be drinking non-alcoholic beverages on plant-based diets, and only turn into sports nutrition snack products. There's going to be a market. We don't know how GLP-1 will progress in terms of distribution in the long term. I mean, I've spoken to clients who have spoken about how they were saying that people were obtaining it in the US by standing on scales, holding weights to take pictures of the weights, and when you hear things like that and the distribution, I generally do think the black market will generally be a problem for this market. It's, we hear horror stories of people who've taken something that isn't safe. The situation has been very consequential. So we don't know the impact of legislation, how this is going to play out for a start. Governments could introduce stuff that changes things overnight, but there will be a market for it. There'll be people who, are using this, who will, have need states, and that will grow, and they need to be targeted responsibly. The underlying need states aren't just applicable to them. There's a wider market. So as Lucy said, I think it's an absolute brilliant point. It gives opportunity to reset certain things. But again, it remains to be seen whether this is something that is fundamentally different, or is just the latest in something that was going to address an issue and ultimately won't. So it'll be really interesting when we run this survey again next year to see what the data says then. I think usage will be higher. But again, it's too early to call just how big that change will be.
So Lucy, from your perspective, how would you advise NPD teams, and how can they kind of future-proof their pipelines?
So I think it's really important to say to not be overwhelmed by this and not think, oh my God, we've got to reinvent the wheel. I think, as I said before, this is one of many challenges that we're being faced with in product development. I think there are some really exciting opportunities. I think there are ingredients that we can pull on to use. I think we should see this as an opportunity for premiumization. And in a world where we're having to sort of, really, the cost of living crisis is real. But I think this is an area where we can really positively influence the good food that we can put on people's plates. So I really want people to see this as a positive. And actually, the whole conversation around GLP-1 and the conversation around natural GLP-1 is in itself really interesting, because it's a new way of basically talking about eating healthily and making healthy choices. And I think one thing that development teams can do is look at their current portfolios and understand what products can be shouted about as being high in fibre, high in protein, how many plants are being used, because that's the sort of language that we need to start using more, I think.
So then, Kate, finally from you, what star ingredients should NPD teams be looking at and kind of prioritising?
Just to finish up, we've talked a lot about fibres and proteins. I think a lot of these kind of ingredients are already going into food formulations. And as Lucy said, it's maybe about not only promoting them more, but also seeing it as an opportunity to educate consumers, because people are going to have more questions about their diet and their health. And, we've seen that in the last few years. People are scrutinising ingredient labels more. They are kind of seeking more natural alternatives and trying to understand what ingredients are actually contributing to their food. So I think particularly how we, in terms of product development, how we view the tools that we have already in our portfolio. So for years we've kind of been using starches to texturize and to solve customer challenges in terms of stabilizing and thickening products. I think we can now start to mirror that in proteins and fibres and look at what kind of textural attributes we can achieve from those ingredients, but how we can also do that alongside improving the nutrition of the product.
Amazing. Well, that brings us to the end of our panel. Thank you all for being here, for sharing your insights. I think it's been a really informative discussion. Definitely taken some things away from this. So I hope that you've all found this informative too. I think what's clear is that although it seems to be a little bit disruptive, there's definitely opportunities within new categories, using nutrition, but also kind of going back to basics and not reinventing the wheel. So thank you all for watching. I hope that you all have a lovely Christmas, and we hope to see you on our next event.